Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Anne and you're watching Art on the Creek, and you are here today on Wednesday for our first series of 15 beginner watercolor lessons. Today we are on lesson 10. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh. I would be remiss if I didn't teach you how to paint the food of my people. We're going to paint some garlic. Are you ready? Let's do an ode to Italy. Here we go. Alrighty, I've got a full supply list in the description, but don't feel that you have to run out and buy these exact supplies. If you'd like to, that's great. But if you can't do that, that's no problem. You can even just use, a set from the school supply aisle in your local drugstore. So I'm just using some washi tape to tape off the edges so we can have a nice crisp border. And here's our photo off to the right. It's been submitted to Pixabay. And I've mentioned it before, I will always put a link to these in the description. Actually, I sometimes forget to mention that. But what I did mention before is that sources like Pixabay and Unsplash and Paint My Photo, there are some free reference photos for artists pages on Facebook, or particularly a photo if you take yourself or if you're painting from real life. You always want to make sure that you are using something that is royalty free if you're going to sell it or use it for an additional purpose. There are a lot of copyright laws that surround art, and you wouldn't want anyone to steal your art either, so just know your source. Make sure that if you're painting something off of someone's Instagram post or Pinterest, that you're just using it for yourself and you're not going to print it off or sell it anywhere. So this one I really like because there are 3 garlic cloves in there, and whenever you're doing decorating or art or anything, any kind of plants, potted plants that you're arranging, odd numbers are really very pleasing. So that's why I really like this one. There are 4 loose garlic cloves in front, but there's the 3 in back, and I really like how they are. Now we're just going to do a really loose depiction of this because today I wanted to also show you how easy it is to paint something when you just don't have a lot of time. So we're just drawing these little shapes. If you're not familiar with garlic, I'm going to say that, your life may not be as full as it could possibly be. You're getting a very biased opinion of garlic here in this video because it is literally in my blood. So if you've never seen garlic, it kind of feels papery on the outside like an onion. A little bit different though. It really is quite papery, and you peel it open, and then the cloves, the individual cloves, are covered in a little paper too. And there's a million different ways, little gadgets you can get to remove that paper. I have a little silicone roller. It's like a little tube. I love that thing. All you do is you put the clove with the paper on it into the tube, and then you roll it with your hand on the cutting board, and it's awesome. And the husk just magically comes off, and then you can chop it or do whatever you want with it. I would not be who I am if I weren't around garlic. It's so funny because growing up, I remember going up to my grandmother's house, and we go there just about every Sunday for a nice dinner of spaghetti and meatballs and all the good stuff. She'd make other things, but that was always my favorite. And we would walk into her house, and even if she wasn't cooking, it smelled like garlic. And that just means home to me. And so I have to paint some garlic here to share it with you. We need a nice little painting to hang in our kitchen. If you have another food that is so important to you as part of who you are, definitely do that one instead. If eggplant is a huge part of your culture, or if dumplings, these kind of look like little dumplings, if dumplings is a big part of your culture, anything that just really means home and love and family to you, that's what I really think you should do with this painting. So look for whatever picture you want. But here today we're going to do this garlic, and we're doing it really, really loosely. So this is just going to be a lot of fun. Now, I did not clean my palette off from last time, so we've still got some of the daffodil leftover mixes on there. And you see that one in the middle that we mixed with the gray? Let's just add a little bit of ultramarine blue to it. And we're using our widest brush here. We're using the 3/4 inch stroke brush. I really like using these wide, flat brushes to start off a background. if you've got enough space for it, because you can really create a wide swath of color. You can get some painterly strokes in there, and you can really push that pigment around to make it very interesting and give it some texture in the background. And that's what we want to do here with this one. I just wanted to take advantage of, in our reference photo, you'll notice that it's really hyper-focused in a few key points, and then that clove in the background is kind of out of focus. Well, I'm not going to paint it that way, but I really like the soft background, so that's what I wanted to do here with this one. I'm bluing it up just a little bit. We're adding just a little bit more ultramarine in there. And let's get some of that blue on the corners, just to kind of give it a little brighter, lighter vignette effect. So I'm just moving the paint around a little bit. Not really even achieving wet on wet at this point, because as you can see in that lower left corner there, it's already drying. It's hopeless. In Colorado, you're just going to have a dry life. So just do the best that you can to keep things wet. Now, there are a lot of things you can do. You can mist your paper, you can keep the paints moving, but I'm just so used to painting this way that I just like pushing the pigments around and dealing with what I can. If you get a little bit of background paint in your garlic like I did there, you do want to blot that out, because that will need to be a little bit lighter. We're going to control those shadows a little bit afterwards. So there we have pretty much, we've got our background. Let's go ahead and add just a little bit more of that ultramarine up top. This is kind of a little bit thicker mix going into there now. And you can just play with this. You can add whatever color you want on your background. Just know that basically when you're mixing a blue like ultramarine or your Prussian blue with a brown like your burnt sienna or your burnt umber, you're going to get a gray. And if it needs to be more brown, add more brown to it. If it needs to be bluer, add more blue. So there's a lot of ways that you can have a full range of colors from blue to brown to gray to black, just by mixing on your palette. So I really encourage you, no matter what paint set you're using, just play with it. So here what I'm doing is I've got the background on some damp paper and I'm just tipping it up. I think I like the way that that's mixed. I think I like the way that it's gonna blend in there, and I like the way that that water edge there where the blue kind of meets the gray is working out. But I want to put something elevated under it. You can use a roll of tape or whatever. You don't even have to do this step. But I just kind of wanted to have it a little bit elevated up top so that that paint can continue to travel just a little bit. And our example of this painting today is exactly why I like to leave my palette messy. What I do when I'm done painting, I always clean my brushes right away, and I strongly recommend that you do that too. Clean your brushes, rinse out your water jar, and then lay your brushes on a paper towel so that they can dry properly. But I just leave my palette dirty and I leave it open so that it can air dry, because all of those paints that are on your palette will create some beautiful grays and background mixes. And that's exactly what we did here today with the upper portion of our little painting. Now let's go into that burnt umber. That's the darkest brown, and we're going to mix that in with that other pile of yellow that we've got there. And we're just going to go around the garlic. I'm still using that the big 3/4 inch stroke brush just to get this first coat in. You can move to a number 6 if you want, and I will here in just a second. But for now, we're going to go ahead and just use that. Now, if you do get this tan color up into the garlic, don't worry about it. That's fine. We just don't want too much of the dark gray in there yet. So now let's go to our number 6, and we're going into that burnt umber. This is a number 6 round brush, and we're going into our burnt umber. That's that one right there at the end next to your black. And let's create a good puddle of that. But now we're going to mix some alizarin crimson with it. This garlic has a little bit of pink tone in it, at least in my view on my monitor it does. It may not when you're looking at it, but I wanted to give this a good mix of warm and cool. So we are using the browns, which will give it a nice warm, but that coolness of the red coming through is going to be really quite nice. This is a cool red. If we were going to use a warm red, we would be using the cadmium red hue that we have, but we're going to use that alizarin crimson. It's a beautiful tone, a nice pink tone. I use it a lot in a lot of things that you wouldn't expect would have pink, for instance, in wood. I really like the soft tones that it develops. When you look at wood grain, I really hope that when you guys are painting and you're starting to look at the world just a little bit differently, you'll notice that your brown table isn't really brown. It's yellow, and maybe there's some green in there and some red. So this is one of the funnest things I think about learning to use watercolor is you can really see, because you're dealing with a transparent medium. So you want to have all of these colors that are layered. You want to have them shine through with these subtle differences. They really do make a difference difference in your final painting. So by looking at the world and really observing the colors that you see, you can better replicate that in your art. So that's why I wanted to add red into the shadow there, because the wood and some of that garlic had a little bit of pink tone. So now we're going to dry this thoroughly with our heat tool, and then we'll go on to the next step. If you don't have a heat tool, just walk away from your painting a while and let it dry. I always say walk away, because I think that when you come back, you'll be able to see it with fresh eyes. So into that same brown mix, I've just added some more ultramarine, and you can see over there, I like to test the color that I have over on a clean point on my palette so that I can see about what level of gray I'm dealing with. Now I want to put in those deeper shadows. This is going to be a very loose painting. The shadows will be very subtle. As you can see in our reference photo, they're very, very soft. What I wanted to do though was get these done right away before I put the colors of the garlic in, because mostly the garlic's going to be very, very light. We're just going to be painting in some shapes and shadows with a little bit of a golden brown, some pinks, and some grays. So let's go ahead and get these shadows in first. Now our light is going to be coming from the top pretty much. So pay attention to where those shadows are falling as you're painting by looking in at your reference photo. We want to lay the pigment just like we did with the wood, with the red tone in the wood. We want to make sure and lay that pigment up close against the garlic as much as we can, because that's where the darkest value of that shadow is going to be. This is another thing about your observation skills that I want you to work on when you're learning to watercolor, or any kind of art for that matter. Notice how those shadows fall. Notice where they lay. Notice where they are the darkest. Now it's a little more challenging if you've got more than one light source shining on something, but for the most part, this one just has the one light source shining on the top, and it is diffused light, so that makes it nice and soft. The darkest point of your shadow is typically going to be where the item touches whatever it's sitting on. So we're going to concentrate that pigment along those edges, and then we'll just go in here in just a minute with a wet brush and pull that pigment all the way out to the edge. We're dealing with such a small area here that makes this really easy to do. And you can see I've got a wet brush here, and I'm just softening that edge and kind of taking that subtle gray tint all the way over the wood. That will help me to give the wood texture, and it will also diffuse that edge of the shadow so it's not a hard line. And again, I want to get the gray out of the garlic. I don't want any hard shadows in the garlic just yet. We will put some in, but not just yet. So we'll just continue to manipulate the edge of this shadow here with this gray. We're just going to continue to soften it up, and we'll add more pigment as needed. Here goes a little bit more in that shadow there, and you'll see where this the shadow on this front clove here, and then the garlic bulb itself on the left, they're a little bit elevated, so those shadows are not touching the garlic for the whole line at the bottom there. I've got it pulled away just a little bit. Little touches like that will help to have your painting have just a little bit more realism. All right, once you've gotten that dry, now we're going to flip over. This was the purple that we used in the background of the daffodil. If you don't have that mixed, or if you've already cleaned your palette, it's just a mix of your alizarin crimson and a little bit of ultramarine blue. For this particular mix of purple, I want it really light, so I'm going to be adding some water to it, and I do want it to lend more pink than blue. So you'll see me go ahead and continue to play with this a little bit and test it over there, and I think I've got it just right. Now what we're going to do is a little bit of light brushing and try to get some dry brush technique in here. That's a full swath right there, and this one will be as well. But you'll see when I change how I hold my brush, you'll see, here we go. When you hold your brush parallel to the paper, and you can hold it from the top like this, and you just scrape that belly of the brush along the surface, you will create what's called a dry brush technique. Your watercolor paper feels smooth, but it's not really smooth. If you look at it really closely, there are a lot of peaks and valleys in it. What dry brush technique does is it skims the brush over those peaks on your watercolor paper. It's a technique that is fabulously easy with rough watercolor paper. It's a little bit more challenging with hot press. But the paper that we're using today is cold press, so you've got kind of just enough texture to pull this off. And I really like using it in instances like this. So we'll go ahead and make sure that's dry, and you can see what it does with that dry brush technique. It leaves natural highlights where the brush didn't touch. So it gives just such amazing automatic texture, and it's so natural. So it really is a great technique to learn. You can use this for just about anything. I use it on mountains, on rocks, on fur, on water to suggest highlights reflecting from the water. You can use it just about anywhere for any technique whatsoever. Now, I'm trying to mix just a little bit of a darker brown because right there where I'm putting my brush down, I don't know if you noticed, there was a little hard water line. And I wasn't crazy about that. So what I'm doing is I'm going in with a thin wash of a little bit darker brown, and I'm going to cover the entire area where the garlic is sitting. I don't know if it's a cutting board or a table or what have you. But I'm really just creating a very thin wash of a brown. I think I'm using the burnt umber here. Just going in very lightly and just kind of recovering this whole area just to try and make sure that we've got a little bit smoother base. Just using my number 6 round, going all around everything, including going over the shadows. So you're going to want to do kind of a gentle hand, use a gentle hand when you're doing this second glaze here, because you don't want to disturb or agitate the pigment underneath, but you do want to put that veil of brown over it. When you're done with this step and after it's dry, I think you'll be thrilled with the amount of texture that you can achieve in your tabletop, because it's really going to have a lot of soft texture when we're done. Once again, we're going to get that thoroughly dry. And now I've got my number 4 round, and what I'm doing is mixing some burnt umber into that yellow mix that was on the top. So if you don't have that mix prepared, it's going to be your cadmium yellow cadmium yellow hue with a little bit of burnt umber. And I always say, this Chinese white and lamp black, they're kind of the colors that most watercolor artists will tell you, oh, I never use those, I don't know why they include them. I feel like, why look a gift horse in the mouth? They're giving it to you, use it. So we're going to use it here in this one. If you don't have this palette and you do have some more professional paints, buff titanium is the color that I would recommend you use here. We're going to mix some of that Chinese white into the cadmium yellow hue and the burnt umber mix, and we're creating this lovely golden brown. What that Chinese white will do is it will soften your colors, give them a very slight opacity, not at all like gouache, but what it will do is to give it that gentle pastel effect. And that's exactly what we're looking for here with our garlic. I didn't want anything too vibrant, too bright, because this is a very natural look, a very soft look. So I'm using kind of the same techniques, a little bit of dry brush here and there, and I'm kind of putting the shadows into the twists at the top of the garlic. That's not as difficult as it looks. When you watch what I'm doing here, if you catch it, I'm taking the number 4 brush and just kind of creating little candy cane swirls, or like the old barbershop poles, some kind of little twist design, if you can imagine in your head, going from your lower left to your upper right at a soft angle. And now here, this is dry brush. I'm just talking about the little stem part, but here's the dry brush technique where you're just skimming across the paper. But right here, we're putting in the top, and then we're just putting like those little check marks up the stem, but I'm kind of leaving space in between. And when you're done, that will create a swirled look. So this is really a fast, quick way to get a lot of detail in without having to just really hyper focus on what you're doing. You can let the paints work for you. And that's what I love so much about this lesson, you guys, is that you don't have to have a lot of time in your day. Let's say you've just got a little bit of time, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes before you need to, I don't know, check on something in the oven, go pick up the kids from school, before you're going to run off to the gym, before you're going to walk the dog, whatever it is that you have to do. But if you have a small break of time, keep your paints, everything pretty easy to access, and then you can sit down, do a quick painting, really relax, and then head out and do whatever it is you were going to do. I just think watercolor can really fit into just about any place in your day. And the beautiful thing about it too is that you don't feel like you have to finish the painting if you don't have enough time. You can get it started, and because everything just reactivates with water, you can pick up and finish it some other time. So now I'm mixing just a touch of that green in with that gray, because this is a plant. I wanted to have a slight bit of green in here. It's very, very subtle. It's probably not going to make that much of an impact, but I wanted to warm up that gray a little bit. This technique that I'm using, I've got my number 4 round. I'm splaying out the bristles. I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit more challenging with a filament that isn't more natural. With these man-made filaments, our nylon brushes, they're a little bit harder to splay out. So I want you to use a very a firm hand when you're splaying it out and a gentle hand when you're painting. It's a little bit challenging to do it with this brush, but if you have another brush, or if you have a grainer brush, or if you have a fan brush, you can do this technique as well, or you can just use very, very fine lines. It does not have to be done this particular way. There's lots of ways to accomplish a goal. You can even just do this part in colored pencil. I would use kind of a gray or a very light brown. But what we're doing is we're just adding these fine veins, the lines of shadows that are in the covers of the cloves and the bulbs. So just trying to spin that out there and then gently swipe it across to get that veining in. What happens when you're using this man-made filament on these brushes and you do this technique, the brush wants to go back together. So you end up creating some lines that are a little bit thicker than you wanted to. That's okay. Go with them. Let it happen. You just embrace what's happening on your painting and you'll be happier with it. It's just kind of a don't worry, be happy kind of a way of painting here. This very loose depiction of garlic is just a fun way to let loose, relax, see what you can do with the paint at this point in your lessons. And again, you don't have to do these in order. You could do this one very first if you wanted to. But at this point in the lesson, at this particular lesson that I'm teaching today, I just want you to realize that you can let loose, explore, have fun, find different techniques, let your brush do a lot of work for you, let your paper work for you, and let that extra paint that's been sitting on your palette, let it become part of your next piece. Now that doesn't always work. Sometimes you might want to definitely clean your palette, and in fact, if you're not doing a background and you're going to work on something like a portrait or something that's very vibrant and bright and all you've got are a lot of dull colors, then definitely I would go ahead and clean that palette off, but it's not necessary. It's just a lot of good paint in general that you can just use. And here's another quick little technique that I'm doing on this back bulb here that's a lot of fun. Just to flick your brush up. I'm starting at the bottom and flicking up, and what that does is it creates a wider width of that line on the base, and then it will naturally taper off as you go up, and that will create a nice curvature to your garlic bulb. A lot of this piece is really sketching with your paintbrush. And if you think of it that way, it might make this approach a little bit easier for those of you who have a little bit of trouble loosening up. It just kind of comes naturally to me. I have a lot of trouble being detailed, but if you have trouble loosening up, maybe think of it as sketching with your paintbrush. I'm doing that on these 4 cloves in front here with just a very thin wash of ultramarine that was in that gray puddle there on my palette. And you see by adding those shadows, it just helps the highlights of those areas on the cloves just stand out just a little bit more. And I'm going to do that here on these back bulbs as well. As I intensify that shadow, it helps separate that singular clove in that bulb on the left and helps it to stand out. So I'm just adding some strategic shadows here. That's hard to say. Strategic shadows on the left sides of these bulbs to try and get them to be a little more cohesive with the lighting. And you know what? I think we're done. Oh, I'm so excited. My grandma would be proud. This is definitely some garlic that I would cook with. I hope that you guys have painted whatever food of your people that you love and means home to you. And I hope you kind of get a chance to maybe hang it in your kitchen. Now remember, if you've used student grade paints like this one has a little bit better light fastness, which is why I recommend this set. But if you're using a Prang set or a Crayola set, you don't want to hang it where the sun will shine on it if you want it to stay. There is a spray you can get though. You can get a UV fixative, and that's like a sunscreen. It will help prevent it from fading a little bit. But overall, using the paints that are rated for light fastness is just in general a good idea if you're going to hang something up. So there's a couple tips for you. I hope you guys really enjoyed painting this garlic today. And abundanza, manja manja. I hope you just have a wonderful day, and I'm going to go make some spaghetti. I'll see you guys next time on Art on the Creek. Thanks for joining me as always. Take care and have a wonderful week. We'll see you later. Bye now.